In April of 1815, Mount Tambora, a stratovolcano in the Dutch East Indies, current-day Indonesia, erupted. While upwards of 10,000 people died directly due to the pyroclastic flow and resulting tsunamis, ash from the eruption spread throughout the rest of the world, lowering global temperatures. In Europe, 1816 became known as the year without a summer, or, more colloquially, 1800 and froze to death. During this time, a group of famous friends found shelter from the weather in a lake house on Lake Geneva. This party included George Gordon, Lord Byron, his personal physician, John Polidori, Percy Shelley, and his wife, Mary Shelley. They decided that to pass the time, they would each write a ghost story. While Percy soon abandoned the project, and Byron produced only a fragment, Polidori produced a novella, which he published in 1819, The Vampire. However, it was the 19-year-old Mary's story which would become enshrined in the popular culture as a modern myth. She described how the moment of inspiration came to her. Many and long were the conversations between Lord Byron and Shelley, to which I was a devout but nearly silent listener. During one of these, various philosophical doctrines were discussed, and among others the nature of the principle of life, and whether there was any probability of its ever being discovered and communicated. They talked of the experiments of Dr. Darwin, who preserved a piece of vermicelli in a glass case, till by some extraordinary means it began to move with voluntary motion. Perhaps a corpse could be reanimated. Galvanism had given token of such things. Perhaps the component parts of a creature might be manufactured, brought together, and imbued with vital warmth. Night waned upon this talk, and even the witching hour had gone by before we retired to rest. When I placed my head on my pillow, I did not sleep, nor could I be said to think. My imagination, unbidden, possessed and guided me, gifting the successive images that arose in my mind with a vividness far beyond the usual bounds of reverie. I saw the pale student of unhallowed arts kneeling beside the thing he had put together. I saw the hideous phantasm of a man stretched out, and then, on the working of some powerful engine, show signs of life and stir with an uneasy, half-vital motion. Mary Shelley was born in 1797, the daughter of Mary Wollstonecraft and William Godwin. Her famous mother was an early supporter of the French Revolution and one of feminism's founding philosophers, penning A Vindication of the Rights of Woman in 1792. Wollstonecraft succumbed to fever only 11 days after her daughter was born. Her father, Godwin, was an anarchist political philosopher, wrote against the aristocracy and the institution of marriage. Tutored by her father, Mary grew up in a house that was frequented by such guests as William Wordsworth, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, Charles Lamb, and at least one visit by Vice President Aaron Burr. One visitor in particular caught Mary's eye, a young poet and admirer of her father, Percy Bysshe Shelley. In the summer of 1814, though Mary was just 16 and Percy married, the couple eloped to the continent for a grand tour. Their romance was overshadowed by a series of tragedies. In February of 1815, Mary gave birth to a premature girl who died shortly after, sinking her into a deep depression. In 1816, Percy's wife Harriet committed suicide, clearing the path for his second marriage to Mary. His belief in the principle of free love, however, precluded any expectation that he remained faithful to his new wife. As they journeyed across Europe, the Shelleys witnessed firsthand the destruction caused by the Napoleonic Wars, which they recounted in their History of a 6 Weeks Tour. We now approach scenes that reminded us of what we had nearly forgotten, that France had lately been the country in which a great and extraordinary event had taken place. Nogent, a town we entered about noon the following day, had been entirely desolated by the Cossacks. Nothing could be more entire than the ruin which these barbarians had spread as they advanced. Perhaps they remembered Moscow and the destruction of the Russian villages, but we were now in France, and the distress of the inhabitants, whose houses had been burned, their cattle killed, and all their wealth destroyed, has given a sting to my detestation of war, which none can feel who have not traveled through a country pillaged and wasted by this plague, which, in his pride, man inflicts upon his fellow. The desolation must have contributed to the growing romantic disillusionment with the radical politics of the French Revolution. For some romantics, like Wordsworth and Coleridge, the Reign of Terror had shown that the revolution had gone too far. For others, like Beethoven, the crowning of Napoleon as emperor was seen as the highest betrayal of the revolution's ideals, as the German composer withdrew his dedication of the Third Symphony to Bonaparte. Still, there were some, including Byron and Shelley, who admired the French emperor and believed that the hope of the revolution still rode with him in the saddle. That hope was dashed at Waterloo in June of 1815. Byron penned these verses after the emperor's fall in Childe Harold's Pilgrimage. There sunk the greatest nor the worst of men, whose spirit antithetically mixed, one moment of the mightiest, and again on little objects, with like firmness fixed, extreme in all things. Hadst thou been betwixt, thy throne had still been thine, or never been. For daring may thy rise as fall. Thou seekest even now to reassume the imperial mien, and shake again the world, the thunder of the scene. In the wake of such political defeats, many romantics retreated into nature. After musing on Napoleon's fall, Byron's hero, Childe Harold, turns his attention to natural wonders. Above me are the Alps, the palaces of nature, whose vast walls have pinnacled in clouds their snowy scalps, and throned eternity in icy halls of cold sublimity, where forms and falls the avalanche, the thunderbolt of snow. All that expands the spirit, yet appalls, gather around these summits as to show how earth may pierce to heaven, yet leave vain man below. When compared to the Alps, even a conqueror as great as Napoleon looks minuscule. Byron continues, I live not in myself, but I become portion of that around me. And to me high mountains are a feeling, but the hum of human cities torture. I can see nothing to loathe in nature, save to be a link, reluctant in a fleshy chain, classed among creatures, when the soul can flee, and with the sky, the peak, the heaving plain of ocean, or the stars, mingle and not in vain. Here the Alps have now become a feeling, not merely objects within the world, but a feeling that exists within the poet-observer. Are the mountains, waves, and skies a part of me and of my soul, as I of them? Is not the love of these deep in my heart with a pure passion? Should I not contemn all objects, if compared with these, and stem a tide of suffering, rather than forego such feelings for the hard and worldly phlegm of those whose eyes are only turned below, gazing upon the ground with thoughts which dare not glow? While this shift of focus from the political to the natural may seem apolitical, it carries with it a radical suggestion, as explained by Paul Cantor in The Politics of the Epic. To understand it will require a brief digression into the philosophy of Immanuel Kant. Coleridge had read Kant's Critique of Pure Reason and even wrote his own interpretation of Kant's philosophy in a book called Aids to Reflection. The idea of Kant's that is most significant for the Romantic poet is his reconception of the sublime. For Kant, sublimity is not something that is inherent in nature, but rather a quality that exists in our consciousness. The Alps are not sublime in and of themselves, but are sublime in the mind of the beholder. We can now see how Byron uses the Alps to pull off his poetic coup d'etat. First, he compares his hero Napoleon to the Alps, and the emperor comes up short. But then, he compares himself to the Alps, and the Alps come up short. They are merely heaps of stone, except in the poet's mind, where the concept of sublimity really lies. In effect, the poet creates the world through his own imagination. This is what Shelley meant when he declared in The Defense of Poetry that poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world. Defeated in the political realm of men, the Romantic poet sought to usurp the very position of the creator. It is this very idea that will be interrogated by Mary Shelley in Frankenstein. The novel's alternative title, The Modern Prometheus, invokes the myth of the Greek Titan, who molded man from clay and subsequently stole fire from the gods on their behalf. Punished by Zeus, Prometheus was chained to a mountainside in the Caucasus and forced to have his liver eaten by a vengeful eagle, only to have it grow back overnight, until the day came in which he would be saved by a son of Zeus, the hero Heracles. He is only reconciled to Zeus after he reveals the meaning of a prophecy which foretold of a potential marriage that would produce a son who would overthrow the king of the gods. Shelley, whose husband had written a drama called Prometheus Unbound, depicting a heroic rebel standing athwart the tyranny of a despotic Jupiter, was clearly drawing a parallel between her book and the Greek myth. Who then is the modern Prometheus? The most obvious contender is Frankenstein himself, who, like Prometheus, steals the vital spark, a fire from heaven, so to speak, in order to animate his creature against the established laws of nature. However, the monster also mirrors the myth of Prometheus, in that he discovers and steals fire left behind by vagrants. One day, when I was oppressed by cold, I found a fire which had been left by some wandering beggars, and was overcome with delight at the warmth I experienced from it. In my joy, I thrust my hand into the live embers, but quickly drew it out again with a cry of pain. How strange, I thought, that the same cause should produce such opposite effects. Furthermore, the monster, like Prometheus, cryptically warns Frankenstein regarding his upcoming nuptials. I will be with you on your wedding night. Here, it is Frankenstein who assumes the role of Zeus, against whom the Promethean monster rebels. The Promethean nature of both characters helps shed light on the mythic archetypes taken from Milton's Paradise Lost, from which the novel derives its epigram. Did I request thee, Maker, from my clay, to mold me man? Did I solicit thee from darkness to promote me? Frankenstein, as creator, assumes the role of God, yet he also compares himself with Satan. All my speculations and hopes are as nothing, and like the archangel who aspired to omnipotence, I am chained in an eternal hell. The monster, as creation, assumes the role of Adam, and yet he, too, like Frankenstein, also identifies with Satan. Remember that I am thy creature. I ought to be thy Adam, but I am rather the fallen angel, whom thou drivest from joy for no misdeed. I often refer to the several situations as their similarities struck me, to my own. Like Adam, I was apparently united by no link to any other being in existence, but his state was far different from mine in every other respect. He had come forth from the hands of God, a perfect creature, happy and prosperous, guarded by the especial care of his Creator. But I was wretched, helpless, and alone. Many times I considered Satan as the fitter emblem of my condition, for often, like him, when I viewed the bliss of my protectors, the bitter gall of envy rose within me. Throughout the novel, the distinction between creator and the creation blurs. I abhorred the face of man. Oh, not abhorred. They were my brethren, my fellow beings, and I felt attracted even to the most repulsive among them, as to creatures of an angelic nature and celestial mechanism. But I felt I had no right to share their intercourse. How they would, each and all, abhor me and hunt me from the world, did they know my unhallowed acts and the crimes which had their source in me. This passage is actually spoken by Frankenstein, not the monster. Likewise, when the monster overpowers his creator, he assumes the role of master. Slave, I before reasoned with you, but you have proved yourself unworthy of my condescension. Remember that I have power. You believe yourself miserable, but I can make you so wretched that the light of day will be hateful to you. You are my creator, but I am your master. Obey. The monster even describes the murder of Frankenstein's brother as an act of creativity. I gazed on my victim, and my heart swelled with exultation and hellish triumph. Clapping my hands, I exclaimed, I, too, can create desolation. My enemy is not invulnerable. This death will carry despair to him, and 1,000 other miseries shall torment and destroy him. With Frankenstein, Mary Shelley critiques the very romantic ideal of creation. Just as Byron and Shelley had done with poetry, Frankenstein utilizes the natural sciences to assume the mantle of the creator. However, the dark side of the imagination is revealed when all he can create is a monster in his own image. After Frankenstein's death, the monster vows to destroy himself after expressing remorse for the death of the man who created and then left him alone in the world. Farewell, I leave you, and in you the last of humankind whom these eyes will ever behold. Farewell, Frankenstein. If thou wert yet alive, and yet cherished a desire of revenge against me, it would be better satiated in my life than in my destruction. But it was not so. Thou didst seek my extinction, that I might not cause a greater wretchedness. And if yet, in some mode unknown to me, thou hast not ceased to think and feel, thou wouldst not desire against me a vengeance greater than that which I feel. Blasted as thou wert, my agony was still superior to thine, for the bitter sting of remorse will not cease to rankle in my wounds until death shall close them forever. But soon, he cried, with sad and solemn enthusiasm, I shall die, and what I now feel be no longer felt. Soon these burning miseries will be extinct. I shall ascend my funeral pyre triumphantly, and exult in the agony of the torturing flames. The light of that conflagration will fade away. My ashes will be swept into the sea by the winds. My spirit will sleep in peace, or if it thinks, it will not surely think thus. Farewell.